Killing Them Softly. In the case of the Oliver Stone, it's 2 hours 10, 2 hours 12, whatever it is. In the case of Killing Them Softly, it's something like 90 minutes. And it never has there been two more clear distinctions of understanding exactly the right length for a particular story. I love Andrew Dominik. I mean, he made Chopper, which was incredibly dark, incredibly bleak, and also very, very funny. And then The Assassination of Jesse James. And The Assassination of Jesse James got my award for Best Film a few years ago. And I've told this story before. I remember going in to see it.
Is it worth telling again?
Well, it is, because it's relevant to see it with Nigel Floyd. And the running time was 2 hours something. And at the beginning, we both went, okay, fine. And then we sat there and watched this film, and we both came out and had exactly the same experience. We turned to each other and went, is it just me, or did we just see something really extraordinary and remarkable? In the case of Killing Them Softly, the story is adapted from a George V. Higgins novel from the 70s. It's been updated to the noughties, essentially updated to the economic crisis, which saw America attempting to deal with this economic collapse and the banks being bailed out. And in the background, you have all this news footage of Bush and Obama, stuff going on in the background about the impending economic crisis. The main story, Ray Liotta runs a card game. A few years ago, he knocked it over, and nobody knew about it, but now everybody knows that he did. Now, a small-time hood called Squirrel...
When you say he knocked it over...
I mean, he had it raided, You know what that means, it knocked it over?
Well, if I did, I wouldn't have asked you.
OK, I beg your pardon. He ran an illegal card game which he arranged to be held up by baddies.
You know quite a lot about this mafia kind of talk.
I watch Goodfellas.
Have you run corrupt card games in your past?
Well, which one of us can say they haven't, Simon?
Okay.
No, I did once get some poker dice confiscated from me at school. So I'm bad.
You were playing poker dice at school?
Yeah.
With?
Jason Isaacs, probably.
Yes, well, there you go. Hello to Jason, by the way, who's been very quiet
Who
recently.
is saying, even as I can hear him saying, I never played poker dice. Anyway, so Ray Liotta knocked over the card game. Everyone knows he did it. Now a small-time hood comes up with the idea that if he gets two even smaller-time hoods to knock over the same card game, everyone will think it was Ray Liotta. So they do that, and everyone does indeed think it's Ray Liotta, except actually what happens is that Brad Pitt is brought in to sort out the situation. He's a hitman. He figures out very quickly that it wasn't Ray Liotta, but the fact is it doesn't make any difference, because in order to restore public confidence, you need to sort out Ray Liotta whilst sorting out everybody else. Now, the interesting thing about the film is this. There's a comparison here between this film and The Bad Lieutenant, the Abel Ferrara film, in that the story is actually going on in the background. All the way through The Bad Lieutenant, the central character is listening to this game playing out on the radio. And if you know anything about the game, actually, that's really the subtext of the film. In the case of this, all the time in the background, on the radio, on the television, you have all this stuff about the banks have behaved like total criminals and they're now being bailed out by the government. Meanwhile, down at the bottom end of the economic ladder, you have a failure of confidence in the economic system, here being the card game, which is now being knocked over twice. And therefore, we need to do something that's completely wrong and completely wrong-headed, but in order to restore confidence. And you don't have to look very hard to see that that's basically what the film is about. It is about, on the one hand, you have this top-level industrial corruption. At the other level, you have this absolutely kind of pond-like corruption. The two things are joined in the middle by a character played by Richard Jenkins, who's sort of the middleman. And he is attempting to oversee the solution to this economic collapse in the lower end. But his problem is that the gangsters with whom he works have all become terribly corporate, and they can't make any decisions, and everything is to do with group focusing. So the film is basically about the way in which all this sort of economic, underpinning runs through everything from what the government are doing at the top to what's happening at the very, very bottom. It doesn't in any way imagine that any of its criminal characters are enigmatic or clever or, smart or, somehow. In fact, they're completely the opposite. They're miserable. They're useless. They're drug addicts. They're drunks. They're people who have nothing and apparently in many ways have absolutely nothing to give. And there is no romanticisation of them whatsoever. In fact, at the very, very bottom of the pile, you have Scoot McNairy and Ben Mendelsohn playing these two characters, one of whom is a heroin addict, who have some of the dialogue very, very early on in the film has the most appalling, reprehensible stuff that is, you just think, blimey, did somebody actually just say that in a cinema? It's also a film in which it's almost entirely about men. There are almost no women in the film. When women appear in the film, they are either as described in manners which are utterly reprehensible, because the point is these male characters are tied up in a macho world, and yet their machismo is constantly undermined. So, for example, when Ray Liotta is actually faced with violence, what we see is bleating and wailing and pleading. It is a very interesting film in that it's entirely about maleness, but it's about the rubbish, the rottenness, the feebleness of that machismo. It's therefore, in the end, it's about economics, it's about gender politics, it's about the whole mythology of crime, and it also has underneath it a sort of underlying theme, which is that everything is a transaction. Every relationship you see in the film is a transaction. It then seems almost irrelevant to say Brad Pitt is really playing at the top of his game, and he's fantastic. I mean, many people have said that.
Because he can't be downbeaten, scuzzy. I mean, he can be.
Well, he's
going to give it a little bit of glamour.
Of all of the characters, he is the least downbeaten scuzzy, and he is still pretty downbeaten scuzzy. In that, whilst he's doing this thing which in the past Hollywood has considered to be quite a glamorous occupation, he's dealing with things like, can we afford the airfare? Can we afford the airfare for that? Plus, he has a squeamishness about his job. And the thing that I like about Andrew Dominik is he's one of those guys who understands how to construct a story at the right length, at the right pace. It's like every single scene in and of itself is put together in such a perfect way that when you put them all together, the thing has exactly the right momentum and it lasts for exactly this length of time. And then there's a last line which I wish I could quote, but I can't because it's the last line. And the minute the last line is said, the movie finishes. And if you can go from making Chopper, which is, all very much, it's a story about a psychopath, and then you make something as sort of epic as Assassination of Jesse James, and then you make something else, and each time you exactly judge the length and you cut the cloth exactly to match. That is the demonstration of a director who is properly making intelligent cinema. That said, there are things in the film that some people will find very, very difficult. I mean, as I said, the way in which the attitudes to women are expressed is aberrant, but it's meant to be in that each one of these characters is pathetic. And in the end, what you get out of it is a corporate, corrupt culture in which everything is run by economics and all the characters you are faced with are utterly pathetic. They won't put that on the poster, but they should.